Hello, everyone. A happy Thursday. Why not a happy Thursday? Why any other emotion? To you, it is. It's another one of our events. It's another one of our Into Games live streams. My name is Jonas. I'm the community and events lead at Into Games. This is the last event of the year. I don't mean to upset you. I'm sorry if that causes you undue duress, but it is simply true. But please don't get upset. Please let's see this as a wonderful celebration and a chance to come together digitally one last time to spend some time with some really great industry professionals, to learn some cool stuff, and to generally just have some nice bits of knowledge enter your ears and eyes. You might be watching this live on the YouTube. Hello. You might be watching this live on the LinkedIn. Konnichiwa. And you might be watching this in the future, like as a recording, in which case I don't know how they say hello in the future, but whatever they do, I do that gesture and noise to you. Today we're going to be talking on the subject of sort of narrative design, writing in media, and quite specifically we're going to be talking a little bit about sort of two genres really. We're going to be talking a bit about horror and we're going to be talking a little bit about comedy. If you haven't sort of interacted with Into Games before, just so you know, we are a UK based organisation. We're a charity that tries to make the games industry more accessible, especially for individuals from low income or under resourced backgrounds, with the awareness that social mobility in the games industry is just kind of bad, especially when compared to a lot of the industries and creative industries around it. Getting your kind of career opportunity in the games industry is just notoriously difficult. So, with that sort of said, one of the things that we do is we put on free events like this because it's free, it's accessible, and hopefully it helps people upskill and improve their chances of getting the career that they want and they deserve in the games industry. I am going to be talking to two individuals today, both of whom have writing chops. The only thing I've ever written is a funny blog post on LinkedIn, but these guys have done it for realsies. I've got Kim MacAskill joining me today, and I've got Paul Davis joining me. So I'll start off by asking you both to introduce yourselves. Kim, I'll let you go first. Just who are you, what do you do, and have you written more than a funny LinkedIn post?
I think I've still to yet crack the code of how to do a funny LinkedIn post. The amount of times I've posted something on LinkedIn thinking I've done it, and then I've had to delete it shamefully after 5 minutes because no one's liked it. So just to say, you know what, do not downplay yourself, Jonas. If you've done a good LinkedIn post, you're ahead of me. But yes, hi guys, how are you doing? Some of you guys I know already. Some of you guys I've never met before. It's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Kim, and I am a narrative director primarily in video games. I'm also a writer in TV and in film as well. I've done a little bit of everything really. I started with BBC Scotland in comedy. That's where I started. I very much started in comedy. I started as a comedian. I was a stand-up comedian for a long time, comedy writer. Fell into video games because suddenly games wanted to be funny, and that's how that whole journey started for myself. And now I'm here. So I left PlayStation quite recently, and I'm now joining Lythos, who are with Netflix at the moment, for a whole new adventure. And that's where I'm at now. Where I'll be next year, who knows? But that's where I am currently, and it's so good to see you all again.
Thank you so much, Kim. I genuinely I love your path into games, and it sounds like you've got some exciting stuff coming up. So we'll keep our eyes open. And then Paul Davis, you've joined us. You're joining us on the channel for the first time. So please, you do tell us anything and everything about yourself.
Okay, well, hopefully the mic is working at this point. Yay, good stuff. So my name is Paul Davis. I have been a horror aficionado since I first picked up a copy of Fangoria magazine when I was 4. So, you know, apt reading for a child of that age. But the movie that kind of got me interested in the genre and kind of gave me a career was An American Werewolf in London, which is regarded as one of the kind of benchmark comedy horror movies. But if you called it a comedy to John Landis, he would tell you that it's not a comedy; it's a horror film. It's a Greek tragedy in a sense. But in terms of my relationship to games, a lot of my formative game playing years were with. Well, the first time I started to appreciate storytelling in video games was with video games that infused horror and comedy, which a lot of the early kind of point and click adventure games did. So, you know, I grew up on Maniac Mansion and Day of the Tentacle, Secret of the Monkey Island, which kind of beautifully infused these two things together. And basically, I make horror movies that kind of try to infuse a little nudge and a wink sense of humor. So that's why I'm here.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you so much, Paul. I think with those two introductions, hopefully everyone kind of has an idea now of where Kim and Paul are coming from when it comes to their relationships to comedy, horror, media in general.
I'll just add that Paul and I actually work together as well. So we're co-writing a project at the moment. So I've kind of came in from a comedy background. Paul has done incredible movies like for Blumhouse and so on, like The Body and Uncanny Annie. If you haven't seen it, definitely worth checking out. But the reason why I asked Paul to join this is because as much as I love horror, Paul is the expert, I would say 100%. And I do learn so much from him. So hopefully between the two of us, you'll get the answers that you want. We might not agree on everything, but we'll try and give you some answers.
Yeah, Kim's my agent now, by the way.
Brilliant. Well, the tag team duo that we have here on screen is going to work out wonderfully. I'm the odd one out, which means I've got so many questions to ask. I'm the ignorant one. So we'll kind of start there. But what I will just say as well to those of you watching in the audience, we're going to run this session the same way that I run all of our kind of Q&A sessions, which is to say, if you put a question in chat, I will do my very best to bring it up on screen and read it out to Kim and Paul, and we will talk about it. Now, but before, rather than sitting here in silence and waiting for a question to kind of find its way to us, I'm going to start with like a nice simple one, because we started with this title, horror and comedy, of games writing, or just writing in general, and I thought about this kind of before we started, because, you know, I like to sort of pontificate. I like to analyze. I kind of thought about the fact that it's very easy to think of comedies that take horror tropes and kind of like make them funny. It's very easy to imagine a comedy werewolf, a comedy ghost, you know, a comedy zombie ripping your flesh apart, but everyone's just kind of having a giggle while it happens, right? We can all picture those phrases and things like, you know, scary movie and, you know, sort of horror video games that are quite family friendly, maybe like Luigi's Mansion. These things have done it for years. But it's quite hard to think of comedy that turns into horror, and I tried to think of a good example, and the only example I could think of was the sketch Too Many Cooks by Adult Swim, which takes a comedy sitcom opening but like slowly abstracts it into something kind of twisted and weird, and maybe arguably Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. So I want to talk about this line. I want to talk about this, like, this twist where one genre becomes another, or where they merge, or, as you say, when one is intended to be over there, but actually people kind of agree that it's also a little bit in the other camp. Like, you say it's a comedy, but no, you say it's a horror, but we all know it's a comedy.
For sure. I mean,
yeah, get into it.
I'm going to jump right in. I'm so excited. So what I would say is the one movie that comes to mind for me in terms of a comedy that quite quickly kind of leads into a horror is, and it's I think of the best reviews. I loved it, but it's called Observe and Report. And it is a movie with Seth Rogen, and he is a mall cop. He is heavily medicated for schizophrenia, and he decides to stop taking his medication. Now, the humor in that movie, whether you liked it or you didn't, the humor was in his delusion. It was the fact that he thought his life was going wonderfully, but everyone else with a realistic POV could see that this man was falling apart. But they decided to find some humor in this man's unraveling. Now, the horror in that is, as that story progresses, there's a moment where we're going, he's going to have to realize at some point that the woman he thinks he's in a relationship doesn't love him back. He's going to have to realize that all these things he thinks are true are not true at all. And we're almost waiting. And there's a particular scene in that movie where he's interviewing to join the police. And he gives this wholly delusional answer. He's trying to pass the psychological test, and he is failing miserably. And he has no idea that he's even failing, because the things that he is saying is insane. So that for me is a comedy that starts to go into horror, because we are waiting for him to catch up with himself. And it's scary because you know that this is a man, he's got a gun, he is quite dangerous. And when he gets to that moment, as funny as the movie has been so far, we're like, when this lands, this is going to be quite tragic. That sort of suspension, that sort of waiting, the anticipation of him catching up is quite scary, because you're like, where's this going to go? This is going to be a disaster. And I think that's where sometimes comedy can lead to horror. It's that, what's going to happen when they catch up? That's where I think the horror can lie. But that was the first movie that came to mind for me in terms of a comedy movie where I felt there were maybe some horror elements. Paul, I don't know about yourself, if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, this one will probably be controversial because technically, you know, across the board, it is a comedy. But Shaun of the Dead is a barrel of laughs throughout, regardless of the zombies, but it becomes as real as a heart attack as soon as he has to kill his mother. So, you know, you asked about where the line is between comedy and horror. It's so thin that Dick Grayson's parents fell off it. It's, you know, you either fall one, like you said, you either fall one way or the other. Have I just broken Kim? It's, you know, you either go one way or the other, and it's very, very easy to fall the wrong way. In a sense that, you know, like something like, you know, you said with Observe and Report, that manages to, despite, you know, all of these very, very serious things, it manages to still utilize them in a comedic way, so you don't feel terrible about enjoying all of that stuff. But with regard to, you know, you look at something like Scary Movie, which you mentioned, Jonas, the reason that you know, it falls into the category of parody is because there is one simple rule. If you are infusing horror and comedy, the minute you make fun of the threat, it's no longer scary. So where you have movies like Shaun of the Dead, where the zombies are a constant threat, there's still an element of, you know, there's still a little bit of a thriller vibe going on there, a horror vibe. Same with Scream. They never make fun of Ghostface, which is why movies like Scary Movie exist, because that entire movie is making fun of Ghostface. You know, even the corniest, funniest Friday the 13th, you know, Jason Lives is kind of the genesis to Scream, because it was taking that Friday the 13th concept and putting it in a very kind of tongue-in-cheek slapstick way. But they never made fun of Jason. Jason was always the looming threat. And, you know, even when Freddy became Johnny Carson by Elm Street 3, you know, delivering one-liners, and the same with Chucky, you know, he's still killing you with a smile on his face, you know, but as soon as someone looks at Chucky and says, what are you going to do, you're 3'2", and just field punts him across the room, movie over, franchise over, that's it.
Your microphone crackles back, Paul, by the way, so give it a swap over. But you stopped talking at just the right point.
Absolutely.
Anything you want to add?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think when it comes to comedy and horror, the one thing, and I'll tell you a little bit about how I got into horror, because it was, I would say I got into horror quite late. I used to be terrified of horror. You know, the way that some people can watch a horror movie on their own, I was never that person. I was the person this was my technique. If I was watching a horror movie, I'd have my knee like this. So everyone would think that I was watching the horror movie, but actually I was just watching my knee, because jump scares, no matter how badly they're done, they just terrified me and I couldn't sleep afterwards. I took a friend who Paul knows as well, called Nikki. She's a wrestler. She's wonderful. And she loved horror so much that she kind of forced me to the cinema pretty much every day for a couple of weeks. And all we watched was horror. And off the back of that, what I noticed was that fear reaction, it's almost like a switch went. It's like a switch went, and suddenly it went from me being terrified to totally exhilarated. And I think when I was in that moment, I suddenly went, oh my gosh, I love horror now. I can watch it now. But the thing that I find that they have in common, and this is something that I've learned as a comedian and I've seen it in horror, is what we want to do to the audience, whether it's a player, whether it's a viewer, We want an involuntary response. We want laughter. We want screams. We want things that people can't fake. We want people to react in a way that they didn't even know they were going to react in that way. That's the win for both comedy and horror, is to make you do something that you didn't plan on, whether it's laughing or screaming. This is where they have so much in common, and the tools that they use are quite similar. But we will talk more on that, but that's just something I wanted to add on the back of what we'd said already.
Nice. Well, what I'll do now is I've given everyone a chance to kind of start putting some questions in chat. And by the way, just keep them coming throughout the whole thing. I will keep an eye on them. And I think one of the first questions that I saw that is on this topic. I think there's a few questions that aren't necessarily the topic. So what I'm going to do is, if it doesn't feel like it's quite right for this conversation, I will just skip over them. But just a quick plug as well. If you're watching this and you're like, damn, I have genuine questions about games industry or career advice, there's a link in the YouTube description that will eventually take you to the Into Games Discord. Jump into the Discord community. We're chatting about games, we're chatting about career stuff all the time in there. Those kinds of questions can always be answered in our community. But what I will say is I've got a question here from a Saffron Taylor. So I'm going to start with your question, Saffron. Thank you very much for asking it. Saffron Taylor says, do you feel like horror and comedy are the two hardest genres to get right? They're very subjective for each individual, in my opinion. And yeah, I definitely agree with that. That sort of latter statement. They are very subjective. How do you feel about working on them? Paul, I'm going to pick you first, just so that we've got a chance to hear the mic before it starts doing the buzz.
Well, that's if it's gone away. Is it crackling now?
You're fine.
Okay, good. Now I need to think of an answer. Yes, it is. They are very, very difficult to get right. Kind of touching on what we spoke about earlier. But we are.
Paul.
Oh, for fuck's sake!
Just do a quick swap of the mic.
All right, hang on.
You got this, buddy.
Yeah, are we good? Any better?
Yeah, carry on.
Okay. I'm doing like tech support while I'm on the chat. It's messed up. Look, we are all programmed differently. And I have this conversation a lot. Movies like The Exorcist, which is my favorite movie of all time, which are absolutely revered. But then you get people. Well, I remember watching it when it was re-released in 2000, with a theater full of kids over Halloween, and everybody's laughing and having a great time with it in a roller coaster, and I was sitting there going, "This is a really serious movie. Shut up!" But that's because we are all brought up on different things, and there are a lot of things in the news now that are way more horrific than the fantasy that is projected on screen, and we take that into any film or any art that we observe. We take out of a movie what we bring to it. So if you think that the world is a dark and evil and horrible place, then horror movies are going to embrace that, and they're going to enforce that with you. But if you think it's a laugh and it's all a great big roller coaster, then that's what you're going to take from it. I think that there's a very fine line between with regard to our individual sensibilities. I saw someone in the chat mentioned Evil Dead and the Sam Raimi movies. I mean, the first Evil Dead is absolutely terrifying. And then he just felt the need to remake it, Evil Dead 2, as a Three Stooges movie. Now, you put that movie in front of someone who's not familiar with the genre or familiar with Sam Raimi's work, they probably still think it's one of the sickest and scariest films they've ever seen. But you put it in front of someone that has that context going into it, it's absolutely hilarious. So you are ultimately, it doesn't matter what your intentions are. As soon as you put a movie out, it's not yours anymore. It belongs to the audience. So it's how the audience react to that is basically that's whether or not we get our next project made. But it doesn't matter. Like, artist intention almost never reflects audience interpretation. I hope that answers the question.
Over to you, Kim, if you want to add to that.
Absolutely. I mean, are these the two hardest to get right? I would say yes. And now, the first movie that I think of is the Joker 2. A lot of people loved it. A lot of people didn't like it. It was more of a drama. People can take their own perspective from that movie. And that's the joyous thing about drama is that people can have an opinion. When it comes to horror, And when it comes to comedy, and I've said this as a comedian, if I go on stage and I tell a joke and no one laughs, that's a very clear sign that what I did was not funny. And horror is the same. If people are not feeling scared and if they're not laughing, again, this is where they are both like crucibles. You know, it's like it's a very difficult thing to get right because we want to get those responses. So if no one's scared and if no one's laughing, we failed. That's it. Any other genre, I think there's a bit more wiggle room. People can start talking about, but the themes within the film, and you know, the question that it's asking society. Horror and comedy very rarely get that wiggle room. I think it's much more cutthroat to get right. And don't get me wrong, I think Evil Dead is a very good reference because people can watch that movie and laugh. I still remember. I think it's the first one where the moon is out. But the moon's not really out. It's just a picture of the moon. And if you look at it closely, the guy's just put a picture of the moon up with some trees. And people can see that obviously. Now he's trying to create atmosphere, but people looking at that can see it are going to laugh. And I think this is where things start to get a bit more meta. This is where things like Garth Marenghi's Dark Play started to get very popular because they recognize that actually, when you try and be scary, if you show any of how you try to do it, people start. The moment that you show how it's done, people will disconnect from the horror and they will start to find it funny. If they can see how the sausage is made in any way, you've lost the suspense, you have lost the anticipation, and therefore you've lost the horror. And that's why how quickly we can go from horror to comedy if things go wrong. It's a whole different conversation. But yeah, like I said, if you're going for horror, if you're going for screams, the only way to know if you have succeeded is if people were scared. And
just to add to that, sorry, just from an industry standpoint as well, horror comedy is probably the hardest genre to get financed because of that very reason. Because you're either gonna, it's very hard to get right, and the producers know that, so.
I suppose I just off the top of my head, because you just mentioned that financing thing, part of me just instantly went to like, how is that being reflected in like modern cinema and TV? And I feel like I can like name more horror or like sloppy but still released comedy and horror from like, I don't know, 1995 to 2005, like this 5-year kind of this decade period of when I was perceiving films and Blockbuster existed and rental kind of culture existed. And I feel like I perceive a lot less of that now. And maybe that's because like maybe there are niche, like you can subscribe to an entire platform called Shudder now, right? Which is like, that's just for horror films. Like, so these things still exist, but they maybe just exist in like very sort of specific niches now. I'm just wondering, do you feel that as a writer as well? Do you kind of feel that like that accessibility, your ability to write horror is more scrutinized, or like it's harder to get your writing onto the platform that you want to get it out to? This could be games, this could be TV, this could be film, this could be a short film on YouTube. Because you just mentioned it, like it's harder to get that buy-in from people and convince them that this project's like worth it. And I just think that's really interesting to kind of explore a bit. Paul or Kim, take your pick.
This feels like a Paul question, so I'm going to throw it to Paul.
Okay. Am I crackling?
Nope.
No, we're good. Regardless, whenever I sit down to write something, unless I'm being paid to write it, it's always something that I would want to see myself. And I think that goes for games as well. Write the game that you would want to play, write the movie that you would want to see, the TV show that you would want to see. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to land with a financier or a producer. And that's obviously one of the biggest obstacles, is finding that kinship with someone who can help you get it to the finish line. But and I'm sure Kim will attest to this. Ultimately, the person that you have to sell to first is yourself.
And you were just starting to pop there, so perfect ending. Kim, if you've got anything to add.
For sure. Now, when it comes to game design, one thing I will say is the difference between games and movies here is we try and pre-plan as much as possible. So if we decide that we want to make something horror, We want to make something comedic. That's where level design starts to get very, very important. And we see this in level design quite a lot. So if you've played Resident Evil or Visage, which I cannot get through, even the Blair Witch Project game, I cannot get through. They're playing with silence. They are playing with darkness. They are playing with small spaces. That is to try and create that sort of atmosphere, but that's got to be pre-decided. It's how do we want the player to feel when they enter this room? Do we want them to feel safe? Do we want them to feel unsafe? Both can work for horror, because you can create a safe environment that suddenly turns horrific, or you can immediately start that atmosphere, that suspense, that building when they go into a creepy room or a forest or something like that, and there's shadows everywhere. Level design plays a massive part in trying to achieve both horror and comedy. Like comedy, for example, works in the same way. Like, for example, if we want people to laugh, then we want them to maybe play through a level design where they get there and then they realize what they were looking for is actually wrong, or it's not what they thought it was going to be. It was a total misfire, and it's meant to be a bit of a joke. One example I had, which I'm not going to say what game it's for, but it's coming out soon, is if the player turns around near a cliff, a goblin will push them off the cliff, and it's meant to be a jump scare, but it's also meant to be funny. So it's things like that you can play with, but level design gets incredibly important in that respect, because space and how you use space and how you use cameras, and this is where Paul, being a director, he can probably chime in here, especially for single player games. Level design, camera control, all of these will lend itself to punchlines, and it will lend itself to jump scares. So it's the same thing. It's just about the pacing, and it's trying to force the player to get into a rhythm where we're trying to set them up for that big scare or for that big laugh. So yeah, so there's a lot to look at there. But with games, as opposed to movies, we have to be so sure at an early stage that is the feeling that we want to achieve. So I would say games has to be a lot more, what's the word, organized, I suppose, in terms of this is what we want to do. We're not going to play around and then decide, oh, this is quite funny. We go in with the intention to create that feeling. With movies, it's a little bit different. Paul, I'm sure you've probably got some thoughts on that. But for me, as a game writer and a game designer, that's what comes into my head.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big differences. I mean, we're talking about the similarities between horror and comedy, but I think one of the big differences, which is really important to bring up, is that when you're setting up a big horror set piece, it's about the ticking of the bomb. It's the build-up. It's the atmosphere, because you know the scare's coming. Whereas with comedy, it's about the explosion. You know, you can kind of see where it's going, but you're waiting for that punchline. And I think with horror, you want the bomb to keep ticking. You want it to keep going, you know. And I can spot I'm seeing it. Hang on.
I like having
It's okay.
visual.
I'll let you fix it, but just to add in, while Paul's fixing his microphone, the one thing that I think that they have in common as well, it's like whether it's horror, that's suspense. Paul, you might need to mute. I mean, I'm going to use my bauble. It should be in a band, really, but really what you're doing is you're pulling, and bumped. Whether that's a joke, whether it's a scare, that's what you're trying to achieve. American comedy does this incredibly well, because the viewer is often ahead of the characters. So even though the characters are trying to do certain things, the viewer knows it's going to go wrong. The viewer knows that someone's going to learn that someone's lying at some point, and that's what they're doing. They're playing with the awkwardness of a character not being honest. And like I said, they're pulling, and at some point we're going to get that release. Bumped. Now, the same thing works with drama as well. And now, as a writer, I find it hard to write anything too serious without thinking of that band. It's like coming up for air after a very serious moment. Someone cracks a joke. Humor is a release, is an absolute release. Now, even at its core, if you go to a Chris Rock concert, you will see people crying with laughter because of that relief. You know what I mean? That's really what comedy does. It's bringing it all out. But in terms of how you set it up as a writer, like I said, you're trying to get that build up, waiting, ping. Horror does the same thing. Horror does the exact same thing, as Paul was kind of getting to earlier. It's about creating that atmosphere, that anticipation. You know the scare is coming. And the scare is, again, it's the release. It's the release. We got it. We got there. Boom. and the relief comes afterwards. So, Paul, I don't know how your mic is, but
I was going to add, can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. If you can then misdirect that, make the audience think they know where it's coming. So one of the techniques that I used it on Uncanny Annie, was I was a DJ for 20 years. So the rhythm of a scare scene, you're counting 4 beats of 4. You're doing the same thing, and it's quite typical in horror. So I try and catch them off beat, because the audience are now fine tuned to waiting for it. You've kind of nurtured an audience into, okay, this is how long we're going to wait for this, and then that moment comes and nothing happens, and then you get them. So
it's the stray cat before the scare.
Just
no cats.
My silly brain thought there was just, when will the beat drop, which I think is a very silly sketch by The Lonely Island, but it's just, the idea is it's a song of nothing but build up, trying to catch you off guard. I'm going to take some more audience questions. Thank you everyone for all of your lovely questions. I am keeping an eye on chat as well. So I've got a really wonderful question here from it is Jay Massad. Jay asks, how do you tackle the feeling of audience discomfort? For me, it's the key overlapping piece between comedy and horror writing, and utilized deftly by some, but I believe it's easy to get wrong. So how do you tackle the feeling of audience discomfort? So I think we've talked about it in that little bit of kind of snap and band and the explosion, but if there's anything more specific you'd like to dig into there, go for it.
I would say if you can create discomfort, you're on a win. It's not something to be tackled, it's something to be cherished, because if you can get people feeling uncomfortable, that means you've got them where you need them to be. So, but as per the person who asked the question's point, yeah, you can get it wrong. If you make people uncomfortable for too long, then they disengage. People don't like to feel uncomfortable. So you do have to give them that win at some point. Timing is everything there. It's something that we have played around with, I think, in both genres. And I'm trying to think of examples of both, when it's gone right and when it's gone wrong. I mean, I would say Mel Brooks gets it right every single time. His quote is, was it tragedy is when I cut my finger, humor is when you fall into an open sewer and you die. I mean, that's his quote. That's the difference. But it's the same thing. It's discomfort, but what's the payoff? It's got to be bigger, larger than life. And that's what you want to give someone who feels uncomfortable, because if they're feeling uncomfortable, it's getting a bit too real. So with both horror and comedy, the punchline, the scare, it's got to be larger than life to take them back out of their own discomfort, because that's real. And you don't want them to feel secondary embarrassment or sadness for the character for too long. Not if you're going for horror and comedy, because ultimately these are both escapist genres. You want them to get to a place where it doesn't feel like it's them anymore. So that would be my initial response to that answer. I might have more on it, but that was just my first thought. Paul, what do you think?
I think unless it's cringe comedy, if you're making an audience member feel discomfort during a horror film, it's not a comedy. I'll point in example, those Terrifier movies, which are doing great. They're making a lot of money for the horror genre, which is always a win. But I get that they are supposed to be funny and kind of slapstick with the gore at times, but they're really not. They're just very egregious, and the camera just, you want the camera to cut away, but it doesn't. And, that's very different to, Larry David not stop talking. It's a very different feeling. One of the things with me is a lot of it is to do with building a trust with an audience. And that's where comedy is your friend in a horror movie. And there's a great story attached to this. When Steven Spielberg made Jaws, he did a test screening, and he had one jump scare that was planned. And it's not the jump scare that you're thinking of. He watched the film, and you had the moment where Hooper is diving, and then Ben Gardner's head pops out, which now is the big, popcorn thrower in the movie. That wasn't in there originally. It was a very kind of nullified, slow reveal. So the big scare when they test screened it was when Roy Scheider's throwing the chum into the water, and the shark's head just pops up very, very briefly, and the entire place just jumped. So they did a second test screening after Spielberg had gone back to Universal and said, I want to ramp up this Ben Gardner's head thing. I think there can be something there. So they shot it in the editor's swimming pool, you know, with a prosthetic head. And that's what you see in the movie. And hang on. This is great. It's built anticipation. Okay, we good? There we go. So they shot the Ben Gardner jump scare in the swimming pool. And he's got Spielberg's got Sid Sheinberg, the head of Universal, at this second test screening. And the Ben Gardner jump scare happens, and the whole place absolutely erupts. And he was like, oh, well, that was worth it. He's like, but you haven't seen nothing yet. Wait for this bit later on with the shark. And then the shark's head comes out. The entire audience is just like, no, because they didn't trust him after that first jump scare. And there are no moments of levity in between. You know, it's just straight up, the shark is out there and it's going to get you, you know, and Spielberg learned from that, you know. So if you can relax the audience by making them laugh, you're setting them up for the next scare.
Very nice. Thank you both for sort of expanding on that. And thank you for the question, Jay. Some very, sort of hopefully helps understand how you might tackle audience discomfort, or better yet, how you might set someone up for one massive scare that you weren't expecting, but then you end up cheapening the effect of your intended scare, which is, I love that kind of backstory. That's a very fun little anecdote there. I've got a question now is from Art. I think it's Art Matthews. Yeah, I'm just rereading all the questions to be like, is this the question I think it is? This is the question I think it is. Do Kim or Paul have any thoughts on the budget of horror related content in games versus films? I think we all know what like budget horror looks like in films. I think we can all easily see a floppy vampire mask or some fake blood ketchup dripping down someone's nose. And I suppose in you know, if such a budget conversation exists in games, that would be new to me. Kind of what are your thoughts? And does it extrapolate to horror comedy as well? Because, you know, while we're talking about both subjects. Go for it.
Sure. Okay. So, I mean, with budget and horror in games, I would say the good news is, as I said before, when you've got spaces that you're trying to make feel unsafe, a lack of lighting, smaller spaces, yes, you can cut some corners. And I think ultimately what you're trying to do, especially in a single player game, because it's very, very hard to get a multiplayer horror game, really what you're trying to do is you're trying to give that one player the experience that they need to feel scared. The only multiplayer ones that I can think of are things like Dead by Daylight and so on, which I do love, and Paul does play with me now and again on that game, or Friday the 13th. The scare for that is when you get caught. But general horror games budget, you can probably bring down your budget if you're not really planning on big spaces, big worlds. Everything's very intimate, everything's very small. The lighting doesn't have to be great because it's not meant to be. Where the money's really going, again, is that camera control. It's the audio. It's the Luton bus effect. I don't know if you guys have came across that before, but it's the what you think is scary is actually not scary at all. The real threat is to come. It's the playing with the mind. It's the getting the player to use their own imagination, because we are not spending money on assets. We're not spending money on big buildings or big open worlds. We are trying to create a small, intimate, dark environment so that the player starts to imagine what could be around the corner. So yes, I would say that the budget can probably be decreased because of the goal that we have. But it is a big question with film. I think Paul can definitely chime in there. For comedy, it's the same thing. Comedy is actually the same, and this is where they do have things in common, because it's hard to tell a joke when there's so much going on. If you want the punchline to land, you need the focus to be on the build-up. You need the focus to be in the build-up to the joke. Because if there's so much going on and you're spending money on lighting and big spaces and so on, there's a lot of opportunity to miss the joke. So again, it's all about trying to get the focus, whether you are a player or a viewer. If you're trying to tell a joke in games, it's very hard. It's very, very splintered because firstly, it's not a case of having a comedian go on and tell a joke. It's you've got art to think of. You've got to get a voice that matches the face in a way that it will deliver the joke in a way that it's funny. That sort of thing takes a lot of work, and that can be quite expensive. So I would say comedy is probably more expensive for that reason, because, and we've seen it before with jokes and games as well. If it doesn't land well, if it is corny, if it is cringy, we feel it right away. We can feel that disconnect, and normally it's because the voice doesn't match the body and so on and so forth. But I think if you're trying to tell a joke, the biggest effort goes into how can I force the player to receive the punchline after the designed build up. That's how we're trying to funnel you in so that you get all the information, so that you do find it funny, so that it doesn't just die. I think that's what I'd say that they have a lot in common. Paul, don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well, from the film standpoint, certainly. Oh, we're crackling. Hang on. It's just fireworks every time I talk, you guys.
It's a ghost.
Here we go. Is that better? Here we go. So from a film standpoint, I mean, for me, necessity is the mother of invention. When I wrote The Body in 2017, that was a $30 million Raiders of the Lost Ark with knives. It was this huge, epic New York set movie that when it went to Blumhouse, we made it for just over $1.5 million. So the way you do that is you just make it more intimate. You just bring all of the action, a lot closer and confined. But two examples, I mean, obviously, we could go on about Paranormal Activity and the Blair Witch Project and stuff like that, where, your budget restraints actually enhance the way in which you tell your story. Here's a perfect example of two very, very similar stories where their budgets are at completely polar opposites. And that's Night of the Living Dead, the original 1968, where you've got a group of characters holed up in a single location where the unknown is creeping in. And now if you want the big budget version of that, which was certainly a big budget in 1982, you've got The Thing, which is exactly the same, where you've got a bunch of people enclosed in a single location, and there is a threat from the outside. Now, the thing that's great about that is it's all in the storytelling. If it ain't on the page, it ain't on the stage. The real horror in both of those movies are the human characters who don't trust each other. And I feel like a lot of the best horror movies adapt that. It's more about how we react to these things rather than how we kind of defend ourselves in the moment against these things. And I think that Night of the Living Dead and The Thing kind of show you, how you can tell the same story with very, very different budgets.
Nice. Thank you both for digging into that one. Thank you, Art Matthews, for the questions. I really just realised the time as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of throw some questions at you a bit faster. And if you've got a massive conversation, have a massive conversation. But if you think like, actually, I've got something short and sweet, let's take that. And then we'll move on to the next question. Dan Tonkin's question is, what is an example of your oldest video game scare versus your newest scare, and why? And I guess there's just a question in there. It's like, yeah, scares designed in 1968 versus scares that we're creating now in 2024. Dan Tonkin asked about games, but obviously please do feel to extrapolate outside of that.
For sure. I think for me, again, I was quite late into the horror side of things. So when Man Bat came and scared me in Arkham Asylum, I nearly died. I don't know if anyone remembers that rooftop moment. Nearly died. And I still curse the designers behind it. I know them very well, but I bring it up all the time. They killed me with that. So that was mine.
I can do an older one, and it's a game. It's not a movie, but it's a movie. It's a game of a movie. In 1990, on my Amiga 500, I had Clive Barker's Nightbreed, and the game almost had nothing to do with the plot of the movie. It was one of the hardest games I've ever played, even though I'm wearing an E.T. Atari 2600, probably the hardest game ever made. But in Nightbreed, every time you died or you got caught by the police, there was this kill scene at the end of the game where it was your character in an asylum just screaming. And it was so loud and it was so inappropriate. That noise, that scream is still embedded in my psyche to this day. It was just so inappropriate for a video game.
And then just on the theme of that subject, you've said your oldest scares, but are there more recent scares, like anything that maybe like you're like, right, well that was a scare of an earlier me, but is there something that like has come out recently that scared you recently and it's new and it's like how different or how the same is it? Do you know what I mean? Like Kim, are you playing an open world action game and then suddenly a flying character comes and plucks you from the sky, or is it a different type of scare these days?
No, I think for me, and it's been a while, but again, go back to games like Visage and the Blair Witch Project, which is quite old now. Just the sheer silence of that game made me not trust anything. And again, going back to the player's imagination, I didn't complete the game. I think I played like an hour or two and was like, you know what? If something is going to jump out at me, I'm not ready. I can't take it. Jump scares, I can't deal with them. Visage was terrifying as well. Those are the main ones that I would go for. Yeah. Paul, what about you?
Every time I'm hiding in the long grass in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I hear Christina Cleave's character singing the Manson Girls song, I know she's in the distance somewhere. Or just when you hear the chainsaw rev up somewhere in the background, I'm just like, nope, 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 nope.
I'm going to take up half a minute just to say PlayStation 1 game called Intelligent Cube. I had that on a demo disc. It's a game where these blocks roll towards you on their four sides, and you have to puzzle it out. You have to get rid of all the cubes by doing certain things to the ground. But this game took place in a void with like zero soundtrack, and as you failed, the blocks would just come towards you and squash you or push you off the level. And it was this horror void that like 7 or 6 year old Jonas, who didn't understand the PlayStation 1 at all, was exposed to over and over and over again, because that's what you did with demo discs. And it's traumatized me for life. Next question. We're going to take a question from Gavin Spores. Hello, Gavin. Gavin Spores says, what are your most egregious no-nos when it comes to creating horror, horror comedy, bleh, you know what I mean, horror/horror comedy games, whether it's with set pieces, story, or mechanics?
I would say the biggest no-no for me, especially in game design, is not to go in too hard too fast. With shocking, like shock value, jump scares. The moment that you shock an audience, like I said, that's the moment where they stop to trust you. They start to expect it. The more they expect it, the less impact that your scares have. So I think it's about looking at the rhythm that you have. Be unpredictable. Try different things. Always have the element of surprise going forward, because as soon as players spot a pattern, you've kind of lost the scare element for me in terms of game design anyway.
Yeah, I think I'd probably add, in a sense, because someone brought up Alien Isolation earlier, which is, it has a great synergy to the first film. And the reason the first Alien works so well and Alien Isolation works so well is because nothing happens for ages. It absorbs you into the world. And I think that that's really important.
Cool. You're just getting on the tip there, but you answered very quickly. Thank you so much. I've got a really quick question here, but it's really good to answer, just because as I said, our audience are a lot of people who are just getting into the entry level or trying to figure this stuff out, which is you guys have had a lot of experience. You've talked about a lot of different things that you watched or you experienced when you were young, but let's just, for argument's sake, let's say someone is just getting into this now, and maybe they haven't had that wealth of being brought up on TV, film, and media, but they have that passion. Where can someone start? Is it just a playlist? Is it they go buy everything from the bargain bin at their WH Smith? Or is there perhaps some really good ways that people can learn a lot of these writing skills and put them into practice in a good way if they wanted to get started?
So it depends on the platform. If it's for games, as silly as it is, just play them. Xbox Game Pass, there's plenty there. Play it, and then if you can't, I think we do have a couple of websites that do share some resources of game scripts and so on. Movie certainly does have that. Movie more so has scripts that you can read, so you can try and understand some of the tools and tricks that they have up their sleeve. There's definitely resources there. Writing tools, if it's just movies, Writer Duet for me, it's free, it's fantastic. It also has an analysis tool which will tell you if you're kind of hitting the mark or not. That can be useful if you're starting. Heart Chart as well, which was created by Jim V. Hart, who wrote Bram Stoker's Dracula, as well as Muppets Treasure Island and Hook. He's done both horror and comedy. He's created a tool specifically for this, and again, it's free. Do check it out. That's what's coming to mind for me at the moment. Paul, is there anything that you have?
If from the writing standpoint, just read as many great scripts as you can. Learn the technique, learn the formatting, because as much as formatting is basically just getting it to look right on the page, it really isn't. It really affects how you read, how you're directing a reader to read something. And I would say go to, I just pulled it up here, the scriptlab.com has probably the most lengthy and in-depth archive of great screenplays that are not just movies, TV shows as well. There's so much stuff on there that you can spend hours just reading great scripts, and that's my advice.
Thank you very much. I was actually just trying to look up the heart chart myself, but I spelt it the way I would spell the organ heart. And now I've just got loads of NHS advice and how to improve my blood pressure. So that's really nice. But you have put the correct spelling in the chat, Kim. So thank you for doing that. H-A-R-T chart. Next question, and I really like this question, so I'm glad that we've just managed to squeeze in enough time for it as we're about to hit the 2 o'clock mark. But Brisha Patel asks, are there any particular techniques you use to transition between tones smoothly? So, for example, to transition from non-horror to horror, or transition from non-comedy to comedy, what kind of techniques might you use for that specific subject? And I'm sure we've touched on bits before, but again, this is a really good focused question. I like it a lot.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a Paul question, because I think The Body had a lot of comedy and a lot of horror, so I think you would probably be in a good position to answer this.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think, Kim, you kind of touched, you hit the nail on the head earlier, where a lot of it's down to timing, and it's about picking your moments, because, so using The Body as an example, for those of you who have not seen it or know what it is, it's about a hitman who murders someone on Halloween night and then loses the body. A bunch of kids who think it's just the greatest Halloween costume ever bring him to a party. There's a lot of drink, a lot of drugs. He loses the body, and he's basically tracking it down. The genesis was like, how would the Terminator react if he had the worst night of his life? That's where it came from. And we have a scene where these kids that are being pursued by this proficient hitman are trying to figure out what to do with this body, because now they're implicated in it. Their fingerprints are all over this thing, so they can't just take it to the police because they don't know who this guy is. So they would just be implicating themselves. And then you just have this one moment where David Hull, if anybody's fans of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, he's a great comic actor. I did this very serious kind of push in. Hang on, I'm crackling again. Just going to leave my hand up here for effect. Okay, so we have this moment where the camera pushes in on him, and he's basically giving you the best description of disposing of a body that you would ever hear, like from a professional. And it's so intimate, the camera pushes in on him, it's so intense. And then it just cuts to his two friends that are just looking at him like, WTF? And then he breaks that moment and was like, what? I'm the only one who watched Breaking Bad? You know, so it's like, it's getting those moments, but then using something that the audience can then relate to. Because if I was going to suggest to someone how to dispose of a body, I'd say, well, they did this in Breaking Bad, But it's creating that moment where you think, is this guy for real? And then you throw the punchline, So it's just picking those moments, and then you bring them straight back to reality that they are being chased. So, okay, we're going to try and dispose of this body. Let's think about how we realistically do that. And then you take them into that moment. So, you can use it very sparingly to, drive the narrative, as well as, bring your audience into a moment where they're not waiting for, the killer to jump out of a dumpster, So, but now you've now set them up so that they can come back and wait for the killer again.
Nice, thank you very much. And now that you've mentioned the scene, I've just looked up. Yeah, I see Alfie Allen's there as well, and I'm just like, wait a second, I know that name. Oh, it's Theon Greyjoy. Very cool, very cool. So you have to imagine that Theon Greyjoy is telling you how to dispose of a dead body as if he is someone who's watched Breaking Bad. I'm sure that's enough immersion that everyone needs. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just scanning through the chat, everyone. You've all been very chatty, and there's the odd question in there. I must admit, some of you tripped me up because you were just quoting Shaun of the Dead, and none of those were actually questions. So I think a lot of this is just some really great chatter. And Kim, you've been chatting away while we've been talking as well, which is perfect. I think we can bring the questions to an end there. Just having a quick scan, which is great because we've hit the 2 o'clock mark. And Kim and Paul, I want you to go and enjoy your Thursday afternoons. I'm sure you both want to de-stress and get into the festive, or at the very least the no other businesses are open, so I don't have to do nearly as much work kind of mode that some of us enter towards this time of December. Before we go for realsies, you're both just I'm going to give you both sort of a platform now to talk a little bit about, is there anything you just want people to know? If you want people to connect with you on a particular platform, like share your handle or whatever, if you've got a project that you'd like to shout out, so Paul, if you're working on anything, Kim, if you're working on anything, let us know about it. This is your chance to just chill and plug and celebrate. I can see you're both in this like pondering mode, so I'm just going to keep monologuing until you look confident. All right, enough stalling for time. Kim, it's all you.
I would say Blue Sky is where I have landed quite recently. Twitter is dead to me forevermore. So Kim MacAskill on Blue Sky, I am there. In terms of projects I want to talk about, there's nothing that I think that I really need to advertise right now. But one thing that I am wholly excited about is I'm actually co-writing a horror film right now with Paul. I don't know how much we want to give away, but it is about a very particular place in Britain that has been haunted for a long time, and I'm excited to see where that goes in the new year. So, Paul, I don't know how much you want to say about that or other projects that involve me.
All I will say about the project we're working on is that it's based on a true story that took place in the early 2000s, and it's effectively the British Amityville Horror. That's all I'll say.
Fantastic. I can't wait to find out what town I've not visited is featured in this story. Little old me from southeast England that I've never been anywhere else. But no, that sounds extremely exciting. And then just, Paul, was there anything else that you just wanted in terms of like if people want to connect with you or people want to kind of keep in touch with your works? Is there a particular place to do that? You might be completely offline.
No. I'm very much not offline. I'm probably more. I've started using Blue Sky. My handle on that is KesslerBoy at .bluesky, whatever the handle thing is. Kim's going to type it in for you so that you guys know how to spell it. But also, I'm very active on Instagram at KesslerBoy again, which Kim has written. So if you want to follow me on there, I generally use it to update with projects and whatnot and tease whatever's coming up. So I don't know if you guys are comic book people, but I just pitched a project to IDW Publishing yesterday or the day before. I can't remember. The days are just becoming all Christmas now. But that was for a slasher film, which and it went very well. So I'm hoping that I might hear something before Christmas, but it's very out there, very different. in terms of what is out in the slasher-sphere at the moment. But I thank Terrifier for being able to allow me to pitch something like this, because it's going to be brutal as hell, and it will have a little bit of a nudge, nudge, wink, wink sense of humor. So we'll see. Hopefully that will be announced if I get the job.
Excellent stuff. Just as the mic crackle was trying to cut you off there again. It's worse than playing you off at the Game Awards, I swear. Topical. Anyways, I think that's us more or less done for today. If you're watching this live, I don't have a live stream to tell you about. There's nothing next week. There's nothing tomorrow. There's literally nothing scheduled now. Not just for the rest of the year, but I also have not locked in any dates for events in 2025. Which means rather than sitting here and being like, Jonas, tell me what to put in my calendar, please. I'm gonna need you guys to be a little bit proactive, which is to keep an eye on the Intergames Discord server, or keep an eye on the YouTube channel, or our Luma calendar. All of these things you can find links to in the YouTube description, because they're all part of the link tree. Just keep an eye on things, because the moment we know what we're doing next year, we will try our best to make lots of noise about them. But the best way to learn about them is to be on the platforms on which we make noise. So you can follow Intergames on Blue Sky as well. You can follow Intergames on LinkedIn 100%. That's kind of our main platform, really. We're all getting around, but Blue Sky is truly the social media savior that we need in this day and age. So thank you, Blue Sky. Mwah, mwah. Thanks everyone for joining us. Go enjoy your Thursday afternoons. Go enjoy your Fridays. If you're the kind of person that celebrates our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ's holy birthday on the 25th of December, then Merry Christmas. If you're the kind of person that does not celebrate all that, then have a nice December/holiday/festive/end of year season. I suppose I can officially say Happy New Year to everyone as well, because I'm not going to get to say it beforehand. Paul and Kim, thank you for seeing us out. Thank you for seeing 2024 out with the Intergames YouTube channel. You two have just been the best possible guests to do that with. It's been so lovely hearing your passionate and just honest discussions from the work you've done, from the industries that you love, and from the media that you've been enjoying for decades. It's been really cool to hear your breadth of experience in both games and just TV and film and media all over. That's it for now. That's the big goodbye, everyone. Look after yourselves, and hopefully we'll chat the other side of 2025. I'm going to set an outro video. I've got to click this button. Okay, and bye-bye for now.